All right, people, we're back. It's the next episode of the Succession recap series, season 3, episode 4, entitled A Lion in the Meadow. It's the next episode directed by Sherry Springer Berman and Robert Pulcini after arguably one of the best episodes last season with the Safe Room episode that they directed. Dustin, you got any thoughts before we get this started?
I love Succession, and I can't wait to talk about this.
All that and more. Stay tuned. All right, a little bit of a quieter, a little bit more of a low-key episode this week. I'm a little bit under the weather just for right now. Gotta love the latest round of colds going around as we transition from fall into winter, just in general. Dustin, we finally got it, the big one. We've been waiting for this. We've been talking about this since, obviously, the first trailer for the new season dropped. Obviously, since the announcement was announced, Adrien Brody, we finally got him this episode as Josh Aaronson, right? Reclusive, billionaire, and Waystar Royco investor. What did you think of his performance, just real quick before we get started actually talking about the episode?
Adrien Brody rocks. He's not in enough things, and I think he's terrific on this. I don't know if he's going to be in it as much as we thought, or as I thought initially when we first heard the news that he was going to be in this, but like I do think like he was a highlight of this episode for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It was I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if this is the only time that we see him this entire season, which would just be a shame because he just, you could feel his presence looming large over this entire episode, which is crazy because we don't actually see him for like 20 minutes into the episode. Like, you hear his name obviously referenced in the initial phone call, obviously, that Kendall has with the rest of the group, and they're like, uh-oh, Josh is a little bit scared, and clearly this guy's a big deal because if he's enough to get everyone else in the room friggin' worried and enough to get Logan and Kendall actually in one space together for the first time since the announcement last season, it's like, yeah, this guy's a big deal, definitely. And the thing that I love is that they do that thing that I really enjoy whenever they get like a great guest spot, which is where it's like, okay, they're hyping it up, right? And then when you actually see the guy, you're almost a little bit underwhelmed at first, like just based off the initial appearance. You're like, oh man, this guy who's in like all these layers of like this private reclusive retreat, whatever. And he slowly, like inch by inch, kind of draws you in because he's never like super over the top. He's never like super imposing because he doesn't have to be, right? But he slowly like draws you in and meticulously like layers in this almost like trap that he set essentially for Kendall Logan. I'm like, because that's the big centerpiece of the episode, right? Is that obviously this guy is very worried, obviously, about his investment in the company just in general. And so Logan and Kendall both kind of have to go out there in order to like potentially assuage his feelings and, you know, kind of rebuild his confidence. And then at the end of the episode, it's revealed that that's not at all what this is. All this guy was doing is just like kind of, let's say like he had like 1 to 2% actual like confidence left in the Roy's ability to confidently run Waystar. And this is the linchpin that he needed in order to kind of bail and go with Sandy and Sue. I don't know. What did you think of all that? Like, just like the kind of the whole like setup of the plot there.
It was a really well directed episode. The build up was great, but it was inevitable. I feel like with the Stewy reveal, because it's like, I mean, that's all I expect from Stewy now is shit like that, like moves like that, and like next week we're gonna get a little bit more of Stewy, obviously from the fallout of this episode. But yeah, I wasn't too surprised. But the whole rest of the episode with him like pretty much mind fucking Logan and Kendall and just testing them, really, it was just a big test. And he was never probably gonna, you sign with either of them or like agree with them or whatever they were doing. But I don't know. I wasn't too surprised about the Stewy reveal. It was one of the least surprising things about this show in general, and that's probably why this episode is probably my least favorite of the season so far, but it's still very engrossing because of how well written the dialogue is and how amazing the performances are across the board.
For me, probably the minute that the minute that you found out that like Aaronson was faking his daughter's illness is the reason in order to lure them out to the island, that's the minute I knew. I'm like, okay, this is just a test. And like the thing that I love too is it's one of those instances where you figure out pretty quickly that it's a test, that he's like kind of just like looking to test them in general, see their rapport, see how much of the bullshit he can see through. But I guess the thing that I liked about this episode, specifically about that plot line, is just how they were able to like kind of like engross and like kind of use that to rise the tension throughout, because like that's what Succession does. Is Succession to me is such a great tribute to like TV in general, because it manages to amount this like crazy high amounts of tension with just people like talking in rooms and having business dealings. Like there's not a ton of action. There's not like massive armies going against each other. You're not seeing one of them like take out hits on the other one. You're not seeing like how like the stock not yet. You're not seeing like how the stock price
fucking security guard.
You're not seeing how the stock prices like affect normal people's lives and see the result. Like that's not the type of show this is. This is just a show about people in rooms in this case, different exotic locations talking with one another. And the cool thing about this episode too is this is the first episode in a while that actually took you out to an exotic location, just in general. Because like they shot this on Montauk, but it's supposed to be his private island, which I'm sorry, I don't know what island looks like that in general. That like I've been to Montauk, Long Island. I'm like, I can clearly tell that's Montauk, just in general.
Right.
But
yeah.
I don't know. Like as far as the whole Brody thing goes, like obviously we knew that it was going to end with him kind of siding with Stewy, just in general. Like that was pretty much inevitable. But like I think the interest that came for me from those sequences, right, is obviously the interaction between Logan and Kendall. I love I'm like, wow, these people are so petty that they literally need to take 2 separate private jets in order to get out to this freaking private island.
Yeah, and then Logan, he went on the fucking one Kendall was supposed to go on, because that was the one leading to the island.
Right.
So that was his message to be like, no, you're still following me.
Right.
I thought that was
Kendall got there
moment.
first. Yeah. But then Kendall got there first,
then Kendall got there first anyway because he's young and whatever. But like,
I think that of all the big takeaways for me from this episode, it's that this was the episode where Logan's kind of just like the cracks in the armor as far as his ability to lie was just shining through. Because I'm like, you're Adrien Brody, you're sitting there, you're like, you just heard that announcement from Kendall like months ago, and you're like, why am I even bothering to entertain this guy? You know, like that's why I'm convinced that like that was just like kind of part of like a mind fuck just in general. But they didn't want to like make it deliberate and known that he was just fucking with them, because that would have been like a season 1 kind of a Succession thing. That easily would have been like a season 1 Stewy or like a Rob Yang thing from season 1. No, instead, like Brody is such a good actor, and like the writing is so good around it that he really does for a second make you believe that like he's actually interested in salvaging this thing. And like it's, you know, until it inevitably leads to like kind of the walk through the grass at the end, and like it almost kind of draws itself out like a torture sequence. Like I felt like you're walking through like the fields of asphodel in Greek mythology, which for those of you unaware of Greek mythology, that's literally basically there's a sect in the underworld right in between like the Pleasure Islands and like Tartarus, which is basically like Tartarus is like the worst of the worst, and the Pleasure Islands are like, you know, where you go to basically party. And there's this place in between them called the Fields of Asphodel, which are for all the people who didn't do anything super heroic to really deserve the Pleasure Islands, but weren't like complete pieces of shit in order to deserve Tartarus. So pretty much basically like everyone, like guys like you and me, they're just these endless field of wheat that like you can never ever leave, just in general. And that's kind of the feeling that I got from the two of them wandering through it, kind of trading barbs back and forth, because like Logan's trying to shoot shit at Kendall, being like, oh, I've got Greg, I've got this, I've got that, what do you have? And Kendall's firing right back. Like that was probably like some of my favorite dialogue of that those two have had just in general, because it's like, well, what is it Kendall says is like, yeah, you're 600 years old, your brain's a scrambled egg, you don't even know what you're doing here. And it sucks because then at the moment it's like Logan's age starts to show. Obviously, he starts to break down a little bit. Now, this is something I wanted to bring up with you as well. So, I'm at a loss as far as what this show wants to do with Logan's health. I really am, because the first season, he's on his deathbed. Obviously, the whole thing about the first season is that they pulled a Walton Goggins from Justified, Jesse from Breaking Bad, where Logan was supposed to die in the first season. And then they obviously couldn't do that because it's Brian Cox and he's one of the most entertaining and engaging parts about the show.
Yeah. I feel like they're going to kill him off this season. I don't know why. I don't know why. I just feel like it's going to happen because I keep thinking back to that one little clip that we saw in one of those promos with Alan Ruck is confronting Jeremy Strong, and Jeremy Strong looks like he has his head shaved, and it looks like it's going to happen like episode 8 or 9. And I think something big is going to happen, and I think that might be the big thing. Okay. I do not know, but that's just me going on instinct. Because I like the decline in health that he showed in this episode was a little too jarring, especially last season.
He seemed to be doing fine.
He didn't really, after that massive stroke. What was it? A stroke in the first season?
Stroke.
Yeah, like in the second season, it's like, wait, I almost forgot he had a stroke in the first season because he was just so competent, I guess, or like mentally capable.
Right.
But this season, I thought at first he was going to be okay on that walk and he was going to power through it, but no, I don't think he can help it. He's going to die. I think it's going to be like a Marlon Brando in The Godfather kind of death, where it's like he kind of just fades off, or like just like, and it's like, beyond his control. He just has, like, his body just gives up. That's the kind of, it's going to be out of nowhere. And it's probably going to be like when Kendall's at his lowest this season and Logan's like at his highest. And that's just a guess. I don't know. It's a theory.
So what did you think in general of just Kendall this episode? As far we're seeing obviously like Kendall's in kind of like now the middle portion of his arc. He's not like super riding high anymore in general. Obviously after the whole big, kind of Shiv letter emergence thing from last season, he's a little bit more leveled out in general. And now in this episode, we see him take another big loss because again, he pulled a classic Kendall move where he thought that he'd secured something, and it turns out that it was not secure at all. Obviously, at the end, when Roman kind of informs him, it was like, yeah, no, Josh fucked you both, and now he's with Stewy. He's like, I love the line that Roman has at the end. It's like, do you have a thing for, like, almost killing our dad, like, just getting to the point, but then pulling out at the last
like, just the tip, but just for our dad?
That killed me. That might be one-liner of the episode for me, but...
Or what was the line where Kendall was on the phone with them in the beginning? And he's like,
"What, Little Lord Fuckleroy or something like that?"
Yeah, Little Roy Fuckleroy. And he says, "You all can go fuck yourselves or something. Bye."
Yeah, basically, like,
God bless. He goes, "God bless" or something.
It sucks. It's one of those situations where it's like he's trying to plan out his next move after the letter thing, and now this happens, and he's like, "Fuck!" It's like, and like I said, the thing that's so much of the interest for me this season has been seeing kind of Logan and Kendall seemingly on equal playing fields for really the first time in the entire show, because Logan has seemingly always had the upper hand, and now obviously after Kendall kind of pulled that thing out last season out of nowhere, it's like they were operating on higher planes. And I talked last week a lot about how this is the first season where we're seeing Logan truly vulnerable in a way that he really hasn't, even when he's on his deathbed. And this episode to me just solidified it, because it's like they're both, it's crazy to me because they're both doing the exact thing that they criticized each other for, where Logan is kind of having to bend over for Josh in order to keep him on their side, and is obviously his own very abrasive Logan way. And Kendall is having to lie his ass off in order to keep Josh. It's kind of crazy, honestly, like how the synergy between the two of them, how that went this episode. And I think it's probably one of the more underrated aspects of this, and kind of what makes this, like, even though for me it's easily the weakest episode so far this season, not that makes this a bad episode by any stretch, but those were the moments that definitely kept me like entrenched and enraptured. Like there's this one shot when they're sitting at the table, right? And like Josh says something, I don't remember what he said. I think it's something along the lines of like, I don't bet on blood feuds, and the camera cuts to Logan, and then it switches to Kendall, like, and it's not a cut, it's a pan, like, and then it focuses in both of them, and there's like almost what feels like a minute where they're just not saying anything, and they're just looking back and forth at each other, and it's incredible.
Oh yeah, I love those awkward pauses. There was like 2 or 3 of those in the episode, and they were always like just perfect, and they really just set the tone well. But that moment where Brian Cox has to like convince Josh that, oh, I do love my son, and he's probably the best one out of all of my kids. That, like, and then if you saw like the after, like the actors talking about the episode, Brian Cox is talking about it, and this is what he said. He's like, I believe Logan believes what he's saying. Right. I think he does think that his son is the best of all of them. But I just think there's a part of Logan that's jealous of Kendall.
Oh, 100%.
Just like
100%.
really jealous. And just like he thinks he might be like as good as him. And that last shot of, season 2, it kind of solidifies that. But like, yeah, I definitely think like he has like a jealousy towards his father in a similar way that Kendall is jealous towards his father.
Absolutely, 100%. It's so, to me, obviously, again, like I think it's what makes Logan so interesting as a character is the fact that in some way, small, strange way, it's his jealousy seemingly of his kids that seems to be driving him towards consistently pitting them against each other and destroying them, which is kind of insane when you consider that he is the source of all their agony. That specific kind of line, because you're 100% right. Logan, in that instance, sells it so much so that you almost buy that he does believe what he's saying in some instance, in like some weird corner of his head. And you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me in season 4 of The Sopranos, after Tony kills Ralph and the way that he's going about it, right? And the way that he's talking about it, it's almost like he's convinced himself that he didn't kill Ralph just by the way that he was talking and the way that like he kind of hurled it on. Like in the following episode, which is the Christopher drug intervention episode, he's talking to everyone. He's like, nobody's heard from Ralph ever. Like he's so like alleviated. And it's honestly kind of baffling. And like I said, it's a thing that I see these kind of connective tissues amongst all of these different HBO characters that I've watched, and Logan being kind of the latest one. In order to add that, it's brilliant just in general. Like there are arguments to be made. This might be my favorite acting from Brian Cox since the start of this season. For this season, at least. And that also goes into this team with Greg, because there's a lot of other stuff going on outside of the Josh stuff, just in general. So, like, for me, MVP number 2 after Adrien Brody is Greg, because for me, this was like after all the annoyance that we had for Nicholas Braun after last episode. This episode, it's like, okay, Greg, he's starting to show a little backbone here. Not a
little
lot,
bit, not a
like
whole lot,
bit.
But a little bit, like a little more so than usual. No, my MVP of the episode's Tom. This is Tom's episode, in my opinion.
You say Tom, okay?
I love Tom on this episode, and I love. Kendall's my favorite, but Tom, Tom wins this episode. This is his best episode so far this season, just because like the way he's like navigating and kind of trying to manipulate, Sarah Snook and like Brian Cox and like everyone around him. Like he's trying to convince everyone that no, he wants to go to jail, but there's something like hiding behind that delusional behavior that's just so interesting. It's so endlessly interesting about Matthew McFadden's performance, and that whole Nero and Sporus monologue he has with Greg is like top tier writing, top tier acting. I would castrate you in a heartbeat. That's just great. And it's so good. I love that performance.
Yeah, Tom definitely was very underrated this episode. I love the speech to Shiv about the toilet wine, and he's like that what is it? It's like that taste of like a nice glass of white wine, and it's like, and I read there's like a thing in prison where they can like break it down and like and further and like what is it? Oh my god,
ferment.
There we go. They use like you can ferment it in order to get almost the exact same thing. And then remember, no, it's prison wine. You can't ever get the same taste as that. And like I'm like, Jesus, we thought last episode was his breaking point, but Jesus Christ, this episode, it's like, God damn. It's like, I feel like he's just losing it slowly and kind of watching like kind of the mental deterioration of it. It's something that I definitely, the direction I wasn't expecting for that character in general, but I'm loving every single minute of it. I really, really am. Like,
yeah. And I'm just beyond fascinated. I just wish the show was about Tom sometimes, just of how like interestingly written that guy is, and just like what does he think he's gonna do? Like where's he gonna go? Who is his lawyer specifically?
Yeah.
I can't wait to find this stuff out, and the next episode's gonna be very interesting.
Yes.
But like with him especially, I'm just like, where is he gonna go? Is this the episode where he's gonna try to go with Kendall now? I don't know. I'm just theorizing as usual, but like I just love this show.
So do you think he goes to jail ultimately?
Like I said in one of the previous episodes we did on here, I think Greg might be ended up going to jail. Honestly,
interesting.
I think Greg might. I think it's
crazy.
I think it's gonna end up being him, because like there could be like camera footage of him going to the building of that night, right?
True.
Like I don't know. That's just me thinking about situations, but like Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just too obvious how they're how they're laying it on with Tom right now. Like, oh, I want to go to jail. I'm reading a lot because I'm going to go to jail. It's just like I just feel like they're not going to do that. I don't think they're going to pull that plug. I just don't.
Interesting. Yeah, because Greg, obviously, again, like Greg has been like the source of like a little bit of ire for us both within this season, because it's like, is he going to pick a side? Which side is he on? Is he playing both sides? Is he?
I still don't think he's on a side definitively.
100%. Like this episode to me, like this episode to me, like solidified that he was not on a side, because it's like obviously the moment with Kendall at the beginning, and Kendall at that point, again, just more brilliant acting from Strong, where he's like, oh, he's gonna try and turn you against me, which is fine. It's because you're not going to turn against me. And Greg's like, yeah. And he's like, are you going to turn against me, Greg? Like where Kendall's almost trying to convince himself more than Greg that Greg is still on his side. And then when Greg meets with Logan, and first off, when Logan almost seems to be trying to appeal to Greg, I'm like, wow, that's crazy, because I still remember the pilot when Greg was trying to appeal to Logan. And then freaking when he's like, do you have a drink, Greg? And he's like, I don't know. I was like, I'm not sure, but I may take some of your finest rum and coke. That killed me. That killed. That was funny. The Roman's line at the end killed me. And then he takes it.
No, I loved when he was.
That's strong.
Yeah, no, that first of all, that moment reminded me of like the scene in Horrible Bosses, at the beginning of Horrible Bosses, when like Jason Bateman goes into Kevin Spacey's office and Kevin Spacey offers him a drink and he's like, yeah, but it's 9 a.m. What do you mean? He's like, no, you don't want to waste this scotch, right? And then like he pours the glass, right? And he's like, you're gonna drink some, right, Kevin Spacey? And Kevin Spacey's like, no, it's 9 a.m. I'm not an alcoholic.
And then he outs it. It's like, oh, I'll attribute that to your drinking problem later on.
Oh, yeah. And it reminded me of that scene like a little bit. But like, no, that I love the moment at the end where like Brian Cox is getting so impatient. Like you could just like, he's keeping his cool, but you could see like under his eyes that he's just getting like impatient with Greg. So he's just like, know what you could do? You could go think about it. Fuck off. I just love it. I love every episode they have to give him a fuck off now. They're doing it more consistently now. I like that.
It's not like kind of being overused the way that it was in the first couple seasons. It's like they wait for like just the right moment in order to insert it. And I like that scene because it's like, it shows it's like, everyone's starting to like kind of become aware of Greg's actual position, or at least like, again, this is one where Logan kind of gets a one up because Logan figures out something that Kendall hasn't, which is it's like, look, Greg is not fully figured out which side he's on, and I can kind of sort of poke and prod him in a way that Kendall probably just assumes is a thing. And so he tries to have Tom get him to sign what are them like those papers or whatever. And the question is though, does Greg actually sign them, do you think?
I don't know, maybe after that Nero and Sporus thing.
Maybe.
I don't know, but like, I don't know. Didn't they say like he did sign them though later in the episode?
The thing. Tom says that he signed them, but Tom walked out of the room before he actually like put the pen to paper. Is the thing.
That's a good point.
That's why I'm like, Greg still hasn't decided. But the thing that I also like is that Logan did bring up kind of the point that we've all been talking about throughout this entire season, which is like, yeah, Greg, you've got a little bit of leverage, but only just. So do not overplay your hand here. Yeah. And Greg, I don't know if that's going to be kind of like the wake-up call that he needs, but I don't know if Greg still quite grasps ultimately like
What? You finish, sorry.
How thin of a tightrope he's walking here.
Yeah, this was like the first episode where it's like, it was a good Greg episode. Don't get me wrong, and it's a great performance. I'm starting to think Nicholas Braunt's character is dumb. Like legitimately dumb. Like he's like navigated his family, his estranged family, like well enough for a person like that, but I'm starting to feel like he's really not that intelligent. I'm starting to feel like he's just like starting to like lose it. Like not as much as Tom mentally, but Tom's not dumb. Like that's the thing. Tom isn't dumb. Nick Braun's character is starting to make me think he's dumb. He's made some smart moves, but I just feel like he doesn't ultimately know what he's going to do, and that's why I feel like it's like heading towards a downfall for him. Unless he becomes smart out of nowhere. I don't know.
Which he could. But I think that's interesting because it's so funny that you bring that up because I'm getting sort of a similar sense, and I have a feeling that this is what happened where the writers obviously, again, Greg's arc was very clearly the most etched out of all the characters, from like pilot to like say like where season 2 ended. And I think that what happened is that after season 2, the writers specifically took a look at Greg and were like, okay, we can't keep making this character like, obviously they didn't want to keep doing the Greg and Tom thing. And they're also like, okay, we can't keep making this character like escape by the seat of his pants with seemingly no consequences, because that doesn't make for good television, and that also would kind of like give him a little bit of like an edge, and that's not really what this show does, right? We've constantly talked about how this show manages to separate itself out from like the ilk of regular TV, of like kind of more regular generic TV. And so I think what happened is they are kind of starting to fill in the blanks, and they're starting to, and I think this season they really had to like ask themselves the question. They're like, okay, is this kid Greg, does he actually have any smarts and intelligence to him, or has he just been incredibly lucky up until this point? And I think it's starting to show he may have been incredibly lucky up until this point, and his luck is starting to run out. And now we're going to see if he can actually muster up the brain power in order to wriggle himself out of this one, ultimately. But who knows?
He's barely like said like an intelligible sentence this whole season. Like he's just kind of like just out of his mind in terms of like I think he's like way too in over his head. Like he doesn't know what he's really doing, and that's like kind of alarming to me.
Which I think I'll say I think that goes for really all the characters, because the problem is Kendall's big move that he did at the end of last season kind of put them all in like this position of panic. So like you're kind of seeing them all like act from like this really big place of desperation, which I think is what is causing kind of this ripple effect as far as causing them to act like in ways that like we really haven't seen them before, and why they seem to be acting like completely different. Because this brings me to the next point that I wanted to talk about, which is for me probably one of the most satisfying moments of this episode, which was just Shiv quite literally getting like talked down and kind of not put in her place, but like made aware of like what position and what stake she actually holds within the company. Because with Logan and Kendall out on their retreat with Adrien Brody, she's kind of left in charge, and she's trying to like kind of play control and like start to like flex a little bit. And everyone quickly reminds her, they're like, no, you're only here as because like there's kind of no one else that is here, just in general, like both with the news head and then obviously with the scene with Frank and Carl. And I don't know, like but talk about it. You definitely had to have been a little bit satisfying to see like how down
it was satisfying, but at the same time, I never had as much empathy as I do for Kendall as I do for Shiv. Like that's the thing. Like Kendall was a more empathetic character, and that's why seeing him get fucked over is just like so sad and kind of heartbreaking to see in a way. But like when it happens to Shiv, it's like, yeah, it's unfair, and it's pretty much rinse and repeat what happened to Kendall in the previous seasons.
Right.
But like, how did she not expect this? It's like she's kind of getting dumber too. Like, and she's not dumb at all. Like, but she's like acting really stupid this season. And honestly, like I kind of felt bad when she just went in for a second on, who was it? Fucking Carl and Frank.
Yeah.
She went in for like 2 minutes or a minute, and then she gets in trouble for that. That's so fucking funny to me. Like she didn't even do anything. She barely said anything.
Right.
And then she's just getting screamed at the phone. I mean, yeah, she needs to get screamed at more, but for other things she's done on the show, not little things like that, but like, but yeah, I guess in a way it was sort of satisfying, but it was also sort of like, I don't know, it was kind of repetitive. Just because I'm so used to that shit with like, him and Kendall and like how he treated Kendall.
Right.
But
and
like,
that's kind of part of the whole thing this season is
and I get
this
that.
season is showing kind of like the trade-off effect. So we obviously had the thing with Kendall being built up in the first season and taken down. And then season 2 saw him at his rock bottom while Shiv was kind of on the rise. Now you're seeing Shiv kind of like being brought down in a way that Kendall did. Again, it's just rinse and repeat over and over again with all of them. And the kids, at the end of the day, because of their combination of ego and that need for validation, just overcoming every other rational bone in their body, they can never seem to get over it at all. And that's constantly where they find themselves stuck. And that's kind of where you see Shiv in this episode, to the point where she's like just not it's so strange, because I mentioned last week how this is the first time where she's actually like paying attention to Tom, and it's almost like it's kind of crazy because like Tom's acted desperate because he needs like a voice of reason because he could be going to prison, right? She is only concerned in seeing if they can get Greg on their side, right?
Yeah.
And now it's at the point where it's like Tom is like flashing the idea of prison like a couple times now, and she's just kind of like okay with it. And it's like I'm with you in that sense. Like I don't even know like if she. You've been talking a lot about like we don't know if like Kendall knows what he's doing or if Logan knows what he's doing or anything. Like I'm more convinced ever. Like wow, Shiv really now more than ever really has no idea.
She has no experience in this at least. Like everybody else had experience at the very least. Even Kendall, even Roman. But like not her. That's the thing that's fucking annoying about. And then she wants to be the head. She expects to be like the president of the Waystar relations or whatever her title is. But she has no idea what she's even doing. She just wants to be the head in charge for no reason. And I don't find that very compelling for writing a character. But like I do feel like she still is a great actress and she's great in this performance. And I did feel a little bit of empathy towards the character just because of how used to seeing Logan being unfair I am. Like it's just it is kind of sad, but at the same time she really doesn't know what she's doing because she has no experience, and it's kind of like confusing. But then again, I can't wait to see where the show just keeps taking these characters. I just can't, because it is endlessly interesting.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, let's talk about Roman for a sec before we kind of bring it back to the Brody scene just in general. So Roman in this episode doesn't have too much to do. Again, I'm feeling a little bit burned just in general on the Roman side because they've kind of promised that this was going to be a Roman heavy season, and he really hasn't had too much to do so far. But then again, we're still not quite at the halfway point yet. I have a feeling that the back half of the season is going to be very Roman loaded, especially once they bring on Alexander Skarsgård. But
I can't wait.
So this episode obviously really only has Roman kind of searching around for like more blackmail material for Kendall, and the majority of it is like a homeless, like looking for a homeless guy that they once paid to tattoo. Like what was that? Just as but at the same time they were also like planning out Kendall's 40th birthday party, which for me, just the fact that it's like, okay, so Kendall is turning 40. That's just kind of weird for me because I don't know what it is. For me, like millennials are forever like perpetually 30. And the fact that like the majority of them are like going to be turning 40 this decade is like kind of baffling to me just in general. But like, I don't know. But Roman got a couple good scenes with Jerry. Just a couple good scenes that are continuing to flesh that out. But I think that the big instance this episode is like Roman is still kind of operating from the sense that he thinks that like Jerry is going to reciprocate the feelings that she did last season, but Jerry has kind of moved on from Roman. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Oh yeah, she's dating the guy, and then,
right?
And then Roman's just like, "Who are you dating? The ghost?" Yeah, that's funny shit. But like, Roman, he didn't have much to do, but that when he was like interviewing that fucking homeless guy that he's like, "You are the guy, right?" And then you do see like the initials on it, and then he just offers him $1 million. He's like, $1 million, come on. It's just like almost like a trademark of this show at this point. Would be like, yeah, we'll just give you some money. Come on, do what we want.
Yeah, ultimately,
funny shit.
Yeah. It's I'm waiting. I'm just waiting. I'm like, come on, Roman. When are you gonna take the reins here, right? When are you gonna live up to your namesake? When are you gonna become Roman Reigns here? It's a bad joke.
Roman Reigns? Isn't that a wrestler?
Guy, right? Yeah, it's pretty sure it's a wrestler, right? I don't know. I don't know really anything about anything outside of movies, but hey, I know certain pop culture icons or certain names that I've heard before. But so let's circle it back to Montauk. Let's circle it back to Josh here. So Josh, ultimately, at the end of the day, he signed with Stewy, right? So Kendall and Roman are once again at a disadvantage. But although I did like the one bit at the end where Logan is once again messing around with the president, and then he offers the phone to his aide. He's like, "Want to hear what happens when the president of the United States gets a little squeamish?"
That was great.
That was awesome. That was so freaking great. Like, first of all, like, how many layers is Josh wearing? This is a joke I heard on like a couple different podcasts up until this point.
17.
Like, it's way too many. It's way too many. Like, I get it. It's hot just in general, but I also do love too that it's like, so this is another instance where the writers of the show are definitely pulling from Adrien Brody's real life and experience, because Adrien Brody had like a GQ article and interview that was written about him, interviewing him, where he also took the dude on like a super long hike. And then, like, right when they were at their breaking point, he was like, "Oh, we can make it a little bit further," just in general. So, like, what do you? I thought that was really funny how they like kind of concocted that.
I didn't know that. That's
it's pretty interesting. I'm like, oh wow, very very much like channeling yourself in your performance there.
Adrien Brody just brought that idea to Succession and be like,
right.
yeah, I fucked with a guy once. I just fucked with a guy.
What do we consider this is a show literally about rich people fucking with other rich people? Like, what do you think we can do about this? And they're like, oh, it's like, I know exactly what I'm gonna do in order to fuck with these. I'm gonna take them on a hike and see one of them passes out, because like what's insane to me too is that it's like, so they're suffering from heat exhaustion, right? And that or Logan seems to be suffering from heat exhaustion. And I'm like, so the dude's like 80 something years old, right? So it's like the points on that island, like they're either like super cold or super hot, right? And there's never seems to be like any in between. Like the thing that I loved about that interaction is that it's like Logan and Kendall's like kind of battling back and forth. Like, I don't know, like, do you see it as like kind of sweet, like retribution for everything that happened for them in the first season? Like, because they're like, yeah, because that for me is like, yeah, Kendall is finally getting the validation for everything it seemed. Because like that was the whole big thing that we talked about in that first season was Kendall seemingly having all these great ideas and really wanting to push the company in a seemingly new direction, but it just Logan just for whatever reason, because he didn't have the killer instinct. And now that moment, it's almost like a full circle, but like in reverse, where Kendall now is in a position, he does seem to have that killer instinct, but now he seems to have lost some of that like good, like kind of good sense of ingenuity just in general that he was possessing in the first season. And to me, like this was just like the solidifier that like, wow, so Kendall's kind of lost the thing that could have like potentially won him the company if Logan had died in that first season, like the writers originally had intended for him. Like, I don't know, what's kind of your take on that?
I don't know. I don't really have a take on it, to be honest with you. I just I can't like really get behind like and have like all the expertise when it comes to like the business deals and like whatever. It's just like it's the most unpredictable show on television. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm sorry if that's a shitty answer. I just don't know.
It's because my whole thing as far as like kind of the pursuit and interest for Kendall now is Kendall's whole thing, right? It's constantly the difference between like what you think you want versus getting that and then realizing what it actually is, right? And like kind of how to the detriment of these kids just as people and as characters, right? And I say kids even though they're all like adults, kind of pursuing the throne is, right? It's like okay, you all want this seat in this position so badly, but at what cost, right? Because it's ultimately not what they're pursuing. What they're ultimately pursuing is their dad's validation. And for me, at least, this was the moment where I think Kendall is starting to reckon, at least just the beginning of as he's starting to reckon with, okay, do I really want this? Is this something that I actually am going to be pursuing towards, or is this something that ultimately is just a pipe dream and I'm only doing it to pursue my own ego? Because that's ultimately what this season has been about so far, is Kendall kind of having to grapple with his ego and figuring out and like kind of how that's fueling him and driving him. Because we were talking for the first 3 episodes, ultimately, how Kendall seems to be operating just from a pure sense of flying by the seat of his pants and not really knowing what he's doing. And this meeting with Josh in this episode is kind of like bringing him down to earth, where he meets up with Josh. He's trying to throw the usual Succession banter where it's like, oh, everything's great, everything sucks, but who really cares, right? And Josh is like, well, I care. Josh is kind of like the guy that like brings them back to reality of it. It's like where I love the line that he has where he's like, okay, but like you guys may think you run things and you may think that you are hot shit, but like at the end of the day, you guys answer to the investors, and I don't like investing in blood feuds, so it's like you say one thing, he says another, and okay, you guys come to me and you're all of a sudden on this level playing field, and it's like we're like only like what, like how long has it been, like a week, 2 weeks, a month since the big drop, and he's like, you're not selling me on a whole lot of confidence here, so it's like, I don't know, just like kind of the levels of like the deep playing of the mind games and how that kind of translates across is something that this show obviously does brilliantly well. But like, I really thought that it was a whole new level here. Ultimately, I really did. And I thought that Sherry Springer Berman and Robert Paulsini's direction was just as underplayed, but just as kind of like really intense as it was in the Safe Room episode. Like if you had to pick between like the Safe Room last season and this episode, like which would you pick?
Oh, it's Safe Room in a heartbeat.
Yeah, easily. Between Tom throwing the water bottles at Greg and Shiv at the Kendall Shiv moment at
And
the
that
end.
was the mind, and there was the mind comp scene too, right? Where the guy,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
That like all of that is like you could find a tiny person could fit through there, like that whole scene, like that. Yeah, that episode was brilliant. It was tense, and it was a great like little bottle episode for the most part. And this was not really a bottle episode, but it was definitely at points just as interesting. There's still little moments about it that frustrate me, like the moments with Shiv just really just getting the Kendall treatment. I just felt like we've been there, done that, but it is part of the part of her arc. I understand that. And yeah, everything with Greg was interesting, even though that character needs to make up his fucking mind. And I can't wait to see what they do with Tom. But next, if anything, this episode got me more excited for, especially next week's episode in particular, which looks like it could be the best episode of the season. And it looks just so tense. It's going to be that episode where Jeremy Strong is yelling at everybody in the room, and it's going to be epic. And I cannot wait at all.
Absolutely. Could not agree with you more. Ultimately, I think that's kind of a good place to wrap it. A little bit of a shorter episode this week, but again, like I feel like we hit everything that we needed to. Ultimately, like I said, this episode, we're in the middle act right now, right? We get the first 3 episodes. That was our first act. Now we're in the middle act, right, where we're going to see like kind of the real confrontation.
Yeah, not that much happened on this episode, really.
Right.
Personally.
It was more of like kind of like a let's call it, if Succession was even capable of it, let's call it a setup episode. Ultimately, is what this kind of was. So we'll look forward to it. Definitely seeing what happens.
4 out of 5.
Yes, agreed. I'd give this same 4 out of 5. Ultimately, so that was it. That was a recap for Succession season 3, episode 4, entitled "A Lion in the Meadow." Ultimately, was there actually a lion in the meadow in this episode, or was it just a bunch of mice just scurrying around while Josh is like kind of the overlooming like eagle, kind of just stalked them? Whatever your thoughts are, leave them in the comment section below. Dustin, where can the good people find you on the interwebs?
You can find me on YouTube, Mr. G Movie Reviews. You can find me on Letterboxd, Dustin Mason. You can find me on Twitter, Duster.
Absolutely. You can follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter if I ever post on there ever again. But more importantly, you can follow us at Talkin TV Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, where I post every single day, twice a day, to give you people the content that it is you deserve. And also be sure to click the subscribe button, click the like button, click the bell next to it. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. We'll be back next week for episode 5, halfway point already. It never ceases to amaze me how fast these recap series go. But in the meantime, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.